Hello everybody, what's going on? This is Andrew, and today I'm back with a deck building video based on some cards from Innistrad Crimson Vow that I found really interesting. The first card that I want to talk about, and this is going to be the card I talk most about, I kind of have a bonus card at the end, but the card I want to talk mostly about today is Overcharged Amalgam, which is a 4-mana 3/3 flash flyer. It has the ability Exploit, which we last saw in Dragons of Tarkir. And Exploit says when this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. So when Overcharged Amalgam exploits a creature, you can counter a spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. This card is sweet. It's a big flyer that can end the game pretty quickly, and it can counter a spell on its way down. This card is reminding me of Frilled Mystic and cards like that. And I think that this card could fit really well into a green-blue deck. Well, green-blue is where I wanted to start. It immediately made me think of Frilled Mystic. So I was like, okay, what can we do with this? How can we make this card work? Because this is a really powerful card, helps you end the game quickly, and is just awesome. To note, exploit creatures can exploit themselves if they need to. So you play this card, you don't have any creatures, you need to counter their big spell, you can just sacrifice this. This can be a 4-mana counterspell. It's not great as a 4-mana counterspell, but it can be a 4-mana counterspell and just sacrifice itself. So before I get into some of the green cards that I want to talk about, let's go through some of the blue cards that I think could fit well with Overcharged Amalgam. So we've got Ascendant Spirit, which has been sitting around on the fringes of playable since it got previewed. I've been really interested in playing with this card, and I played a few decks with it, but it's never been like amazing, right? It hasn't been a huge player, kind of like I hoped it would be. But this could be the time. This could be Spirit's time to shine. This could be Ascendant Spirit's time to shine. We've also got a Suspicious Stowaway from the previous set. So 1 mana 1/1 can't be blocked, and whenever it hits an opponent, you loot. But on the backside, it's a 2/1, and whenever it hits an opponent, you draw a card. I really like Seafaring Werewolf, especially in some sort of blue-based tempo deck. You play this on turn 1 or turn 2, then on turn 3 you just pass the turn to hold up a counter spell, and this thing flips and it just draws you a card for the rest of the game unless they kill it. It's a pretty powerful card. And then decks have been using Imrith as a finisher. This big dragon has flying, has ward 4, so it's really hard to kill. It's a 5/5, and whenever it hits them, you draw a card. Then if you have fewer than 3 cards in hand, you keep drawing until you hit 3. It's a really powerful card, great way to refuel. And it would fit really well in this blue flyers tempo-based deck that we're thinking about putting together. Spectral Adversary, it's from the last Innistrad set. It is another flash flyer that has an ability on enters the battlefield to phase creatures out, and this can really help you win the race. I don't know, so I'm going to go over a lot of cards, and if I didn't mention it before, I don't know if all of these cards go in the same deck, but I'm just going over cards that I would start with. I would like put all in my deck builder, and then I'd start taking some stuff out and seeing what works. I'd want to try Spectral Adversary in a deck like this. The more that creature decks become popular, the better this card gets, because you get to turn off their creatures and then just smash with a 3/2 or something like that. It's a pretty good card. Moving on into some of the spells that we have to support, we've got Consider, obviously. We've got Concerted Defense, which is sometimes Spell Pierce, sometimes a lot worse than Spell Pierce, sometimes a lot better than Spell Pierce, but it's worth remembering that this card exists. We have Jwari Disruption, which has been excellent for the decks that want it. Obviously, we've got Saw It Coming, which is the Foretell counterspell. Now, Saw It Coming to me has been super awkward. I want a 2-mana counterspell that I can reliably cast. Saw It Coming doesn't do it for me. This is 3 mana on turn 2 when you want it. This is nothing like Wizard's Retort or Lookout's Dispersal from previous blue decks. It doesn't quite do it. But we got some new counterspells. We got Wash Away, which is a 1-mana counterspell when you counter something that was cast from not their hand. So this can easily counter Alrund's Epiphanies, other Saw It Comings, and at worst case scenario, it's just a Saw It Coming. So I think Wash Away is going to be playable. I don't know how many you start in the main deck, how many is in your sideboard, but this is something to keep in the back of our minds as we start the format, because the Alrund's Epiphany decks are going to be very, very good still. But the counterspell that I'm most excited about is the reprint of Syncopate. Syncopate is a blue and X to counter target spell unless its controller pays X. If that spell is countered, exile it instead of putting it into the graveyard. So you can play this on turn 2 to hit the play they make on curve, and then it scales into the late game where you can use all of your mana to counter whatever. Syncopate is great, and it's going to be a reason, in my opinion, that we can play decks like this again. Now, of course, we also have Memory Deluge as a way to gas back up if we're playing mostly at instant speed. Another card from the new set that I'm interested in is the Cemetery Illuminator. It's a 2/3 flyer. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, we exile a card from a graveyard. We can look at the top card of our deck at any time. Once each turn, we may cast a spell from the top of our library if it shares a card type with a card exiled with it. Okay, so as long as we exile instant and creature in our blue-based flash deck, we can cast all the spells off the top of our deck, as long as this is on the battlefield. And while it sits there, it's a 2/3 flyer that's going to keep attacking our opponent's graveyard. I think even if we decide that we want to be a flash deck, we want to make room for this card. It's just going to sit there and generate us a bunch of card advantage, which I think is going to be really, really useful. So keep our eye on Cemetery Illuminator. The whole Cemetery cycle of cards is really powerful, but this one in particular I want to keep my eye on. And then we've got Hullbreaker Horror. This is a big ol' kraken. 7 mana, 7/8 with flash, can't be countered. Whenever we cast a spell, we can do one of two things. We can return a spell we don't control to its owner's hand, or we can return any non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Okay, so this is a big ol' thing that has a really cool ability. When you get to 7 mana though, you're usually out of cards. Or you don't have too many cards left to cast. Well, Hullbreaker Horror fits really nicely along a deck that wants to play Leer. Leer gives all of your instants and sorceries flashback, but it says spells can't be countered. So Leer with Hullbreaker Horror turns all of your spells into remands or into things that bounce, or into like boomerangs, kind of, unsummons. Now, I don't know if these two cards go in the same deck as Overcharged Amalgam, or if there are 2 different decks, 3 different decks based on all the blue cards I just talked about. But all of these cool blue cards are really making me want to try to figure out the best shell for some sort of flash tempo-based deck. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the blue-green deck from a few years ago that had Growth Spiral, Frilled Mystic, and Nightpack Ambusher, along with Nissa, who shakes the world, got me thinking. What can we do to ramp a little bit to have access to these 4-mana spells a little bit sooner so that they have a better chance to make an impact on the board? The first card that came to mind is Prosperous Innkeeper. This is a 2-mana 1/1 that enters the battlefield and makes a treasure token. And then it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, we gain a life. Now, the interesting thing about Innkeeper is that the most important thing it does is makes a treasure the turn it comes into play. We can play this on turn 2, it can make a treasure, then if it survives to turn 3, we get to play an untapped land, and now we have 4 mana up. And we have a disposable creature that's already done its job. I'm definitely looking at Prosperous Innkeeper to be one of the ways that we generate value on the exploit if we move into green. Other options if we're in green are Lotus Cobra. This card still exists in standard. It's still potentially extremely powerful. We just need to figure out exactly the right place for it. But there's, you got to feel like there's something here. Maybe it's not the flash deck. Maybe it's the go big deck. But we got to remember that Lotus Cobra exists. Now we've also got cards like Sculptor of Winter. We've got Sculptor of Winter, and we've got this Scaled Herbalist, which do slightly different things, but they're similar. This puts a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Sculptor untaps a land. These cards ramp you, and they're a little bit more. They're a little bit bigger than Floral Tetrahedron, which is another card you can play. These cards I am highlighting because they run out of value a little easier than the Tangled Florahedron. You run out of lands to play with Scaled Herbalist, and you're okay sacrificing it to an exploit. Is kind of where I'm thinking. This card, You Happen on a Glade, is a weird card. It's really slow, but it's really powerful if you can find the right shelf for it, I think. You get to search your library for 2 basics, or you get to return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand at instant speed. I feel like this could be a player in a deck hoping to play at instant speed anyways that has blue mana. I don't know where it fits. I'm just highlighting cards that could go into this deck. We saw Quandrix Cultivator a little bit show up as a body that's a nice roadblock that also ramps you. It ramps you from 4 straight up to 6, which could be really, really nice. It's another card with an enters the battlefield ability. You wouldn't feel too bad sacrificing this for an exploit if you needed to. There's a chance this makes the cut. It doesn't have flash, and it's a little expensive. So it feels like there might be 2 different decks here. One that's more ramp focused, one that's more flash focused. In the ramp focused version, we did get Splendid Reclamation as a reprint. It returns all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I don't know exactly what we're doing with this, but I wanted to highlight that there's this powerful ramp spell if we can find a way to make it work. And of course, if we're in green, I'd be remiss to not mention Wrenn 7 as a powerful thing that we could be working up to. The green-blue flash deck from a few years ago that I mentioned played Nissa Who Shakes the World. Nissa was great in that deck because she untapped a breeding pool, and then you had 2 mana up. Wrenn 7 obviously doesn't do that, but Wrenn is a great play to be working towards. Now, if we're in green, we get access to Decisive Denial as an additional counterspell / fight spell. I think this card's pretty good, actually, and it would be nice to just have access to it if we're playing green-blue. We also get access to Quandrix Command, which is a weird card, but it counters an artifact or enchantment spell, and with Ranger class and Esika's Chariot being such a big part of the format, there's a chance that Quandrix Command could finally have a time to shine if green-blue flash is an actual thing that we're trying to do. So that's the green cards that I wanted to highlight. Moving on, there are some white cards that could fit in well with getting lands and making sure that we're keeping up on tempo, untapping lands, things like that. Maressa Rootgrazer has shown up in the green-white landfall deck as a way to ramp, right? If you can play this on 2, then play another land. Now you've got 4 lands, and you've got a creature that maybe you don't mind exploiting. Making the mana work and having basics for this to put into play might be a little tough, might be too much of a reach, but I wanted to mention this card. If we're green-white, we could also get access to Yasharn, another nice, powerful creature to be casting. If we're in white, we also get Teferi, who slows the sunset potentially. Teferi can untap artifacts, creatures, and lands, and potentially leave mana up for another counterspell. Now, Teferi hasn't really found that many spots in Standard. There's a blue-white control deck that plays him, and I put out a Bant deck that I was pretty happy with, but nothing like super competitive has broken through yet. I don't know if you want to be blue-white for this flash deck, just so you can play Teferi sometimes. But I wanted to mention that Teferi does untap things, which can mean you can play Teferi and untap and still have a counterspell left up. Of course, another option is to go into blue-black and get access to some of the rogues that still exist in the format. So we, of course, Soaring Thought Thief, still here, still a powerful card. You hold up 2 mana, they don't do anything, you play this, you start attacking them, you start milling them. You also still have Merfolk Windrobber, a 1 mana spell that loses its value as the game goes on, and definitely wouldn't mind being exploited. Ruin Crab, you could say the same. I don't know that we have as much mill stuff that we need to be doing, but maybe you just want to mill them so they have 8 or 10 cards in their graveyard, and then you can exploit the Ruin Crab safely for your Overcharged Amalgam. If we're blue-black and playing at instant speed, we also get access to Siphon Insight, which is a powerful draw spell. You get to draw cards off of your opponent's deck, which is pretty cool. You can hit lands, you can hit removal spells. This card's cool, and it shows up sometimes, but this could be another really nice home for it. Ebon Death Dracolich is a 5/2 flash flyer. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you can cast it from your graveyard if another creature died this turn. So, I'm not saying you'll have 8 mana a lot of the time, but if you ever do get a chance to exploit something and recast this, you'd be feeling pretty good. This is just another top end if we wanted to go into a blue-black flash direction. We'd also pick up a bunch of the nice black removal spells if we went this way. Now again, I'm not I'm not saying that this is the way to build this deck, but it's an option. Now, I've talked a lot about Nissa Who Shakes the World. We have a Nissa in Standard. Nissa of Shadowed Bows is a 4-mana planeswalker. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you put a loyalty counter on her. She +1s to untap a land you control. You may have it become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste and menace, but it's still a land. And then her -5 reanimates something with 2 +1/+1 counters if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of lands you control. Nissa's powerful and hasn't found a home yet. I don't know if we're playing this weird Sultai flash deck or not, but having the pathways and now having all 10 of the slow lands means that it's possible. And the fact that Nissa, you can play Nissa on turn 5, so you can go 4 mana, play Nissa, play an untapped land, get a landfall trigger, +1 Nissa. Now you have 2 lands untapped. You've got a counterspell or you've got a removal spell up. That's potentially really good. She can bring back your flyers, your things that have died already. I think there might be something here. I don't know. But I think I might try something out using Nissa to untap lands to make sure you've got counterspells up for the next few turns. Now, if we're in Sultai, maybe we play Beledros Witherbloom, a 4/4 flyer that makes pests and can pay 10 life to untap all your lands. So you tap out to cast him, he makes a pest on your opponent's upkeep, and you get to untap all your lands to play your counterspells. I don't know. Maybe. You know, there's a lot of cards here that have some untapped potential when thinking about pairing them with blue in this like tempo E flash deck. So all that being said, I think where I want to start is just with some green creatures. Some Prosperous Innkeepers, probably some Tangled Florahedrons, and just see where we end up in this green-blue tempo-y flash area. The more I talk about it, the more I think adding black to the deck could be really sweet. Getting access to Siphon Insight and the Nissa could be really fun. It might be unnecessary to switch the mana there, though, so starting green-blue and just trying to keep it streamlined is probably where I'd want to start. So once I put together a list that I'm happy with, I'll definitely record a video for this channel and go through some games with what I come up with, and I'll keep working on flash decks as we move through the format. Before I end this video, there is one more card I want to talk about, though. Gralnock the Omnivore is a 4-mana 3/3 frog, legendary creature frog. It says whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. Separately, whenever a permanent is put into your graveyard from your library, exile it with a Croak counter. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with Croak counters on them. Okay, this seems like it's only built for Commander, right? Some Commander players are going to love that there's a legendary frog that they can now add to their deck. But what if this is a Standard card? 4-mana 3/3 in Standard is not always where you want to be, but if you're grinding out your opponent, Gralnock lets you grind a lot. If you're self-milling, if you're attacking, this thing can really get you a lot of card advantage. It's drawing you a lot of cards. So how can we take advantage of it? Well, we got some self-mill synergies over the last few sets, but I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about the part that says whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. Well, how many frogs are there in Standard, actually? Well, there's not a lot, but there are changelings. So the Bears of Lityara is a enchantment. It's a saga from Kaldheim. When it comes into play, it makes a 2/2. Then it turns any number of shapeshifters to 4/4s. Then it lets them attack a creature. It lets them fight a creature, or bite a creature, I guess. So, Bears of Lityara with something like Masked Vandal means now we have at least 8 frogs we can play in our deck. That's got to be good enough for something, right? Masked Vandal was seeing play in Standard 2022, so the special format on Arena before rotation. You know, getting an artifact or enchantment is valuable. A 1/3 can be okay, especially if it's a frog and if it's a shapeshifter for Bears of Lityara. I don't know. There might be something here. I also wanted to mention Croaking Counterpart, which was a hilarious card from the last set. It makes a token copy of target non-frog creature, except it's a 1/1 frog now, and it has flashback for 5. It makes a frog. It turns any creature into a frog. So now we can just double up on some creature with a cool enters the battlefield ability, or something like that. Maybe something with Death Touch. Now it's a frog. Now when Gralnock comes down, it can attack and draw you a bunch of cards. Lastly, there actually is a creature in Standard with the frog type line, other than Gralnock. It's Froghemoth from the D&D set, Adventures in the Forgotten Realm. Froghemoth was a card I was really excited about, but it hasn't really seen play outside of fringe play in sideboards in the mono green deck. So Froghemoth is a 5-mana 4/4 trample haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can exile up to that many target cards from their graveyard. Then you can put a +1/+1 counter on Froghemoth for each creature card exiled this way, and you gain a life for each non-creature exiled this way. So Froghemoth is a big thing that has haste, can come down, smash your opponent, exile a bunch of cards from their graveyards, and either get bigger or gain you some life. I think Froghemoth could be an excellent card in a Standard format, right? Trample Haste is powerful. 4/4 is a good enough stat line. It's got a sweet ability. And now it's a frog. So if you can curve Gralnock into Froghemoth, now all of a sudden we're drawing cards while we're nuking their graveyard and making our Froghemoth better. I don't think that this deck could actually work, but man, I'm crossing my fingers that we could do something with Gralnock and Froghemoth. It just sounds like a lot of fun. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you've had some fun putting some decks together during spoiler season, just like I have. Can't wait for the new set. I'm going to hop in and do a bunch of drafts over this weekend, and then dig into Standard next week. So again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day, and I will catch you next time.